Hi, everybody. So, we're going to go ahead and start doing the systems of the human body. And on this slide deck, there are four systems: skeletal, muscle, um, respiratory, and circulatory. I'm not sure that they're in that order, but they're all on this slide deck. So, this whole slide deck is in a link in your unit slides. Okay. And so you can go and look at any of the slides you want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do screencastify, but I'm going to do them separately. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to post them underneath the title so that if you want to go in and you just want to see the skeletal system one, you can go there and you can just click on that and it'll bring you right to it. It'll all be in one slide deck for you for these four systems, but the screencast will be separate. All right. So let's get started. So when we look at this first system, the first system is the skeletal system. And I think for most people, they get an idea. They may not know everything about it, certainly, but they know that it's made up of bones, that bones is one of the things. Okay. And so there are like six major jobs that it does. And I'm going to talk real briefly about some details here, and then we'll get into it a little bit more deeply. So, one of the things the skeletal system does is it provides support and form for your body, right? It helps give your body support so you're not just a big old pile of goo, right? And it gives your body form. Now, remember when we did cells, we learned that plant cells have something called a cell wall and that animal cells don't. Well, animal cells don't because animals typically have some kind of endoskeleton, right? Endo means inside, or exoskeleton, right? Which is a skeleton that's outside the body, right? So we don't need cell walls. Another thing that it does for us is it doesn't only give us support and form, it actually protects our internal organs. So our heart and our lungs, especially, are protected by our rib cage. And they're really kind of important organs, right? The skeletal system allows us to move. Now, skeletal system doesn't work by itself, right? It has some of its own functions that it does on itself. But in order for it to move, you have to have muscles. So those two systems are almost impossible to separate. And so the different tissues and organs in that body. So bones, believe it or not, actually considered an organ because they are multiple kinds of tissue, right? And that's the definition. And so bones are part of the system. Cartilage is part of the system. So cartilage is like um, your ears are made out of cartilage. The bridge of your nose is made out of cartilage. If you're eating chicken, right, that gristly part at the end of a bone, that's also that at the joint is cartilage, and so joints are where two bones come together. Ligaments are really, really tough material that holds together bone to bone. So the bones are actually connected to each other in some places, right? And so so those hold bone to bone. Bone to muscle are tendons. Okay. And so um, both ligaments and tendons are very, very strong fibers, but they do two different things. Ligaments hold bones together, and then tendons hold bones and muscles together. So when we go to the next slide, which is slide number 4, we look at the six major functions. Production of blood cells is an incredibly important function of bones. So in long bones, there is a lot of bone marrow, and bone marrow is actually where blood cells are produced. And so if you hear of someone who needs a bone marrow transplant, this is the reason why. Okay. The bone marrow transplant will allow them to have functioning marrow that will in the cells that will actually make good red blood cells. Support for a body, we already talked about that. Protection, kind of talked about that. Storage of ions. So storage of ions are like the potassium and the calcium that make up your bones. That's what makes your bones really strong. Well, there are other functions for potassium and calcium. And so if your body needs any potassium or calcium, it'll actually go get it from your bones. So, endocrine regulation is the next one. We're not going to really discuss endocrine regulation at all. Endocrine system, the endocrine whole system, it has to do with hormones, and so it's a very important part. But in the seventh grade, it's not something we really have to deal with at this point. Okay, and so if you go to the next one, and we talked about this a little bit, so your brain is protected by your cranium, by your skull, right? Your brain and your eyes, both really sensitive structures, so you want to make sure they're protected. Your heart and your lungs are protected by your rib cage. And then your spinal cord is protected by your vertebrae. So your vertebrae are the bones in your back, basically, right? And so you have this thick, it's like this thick cord of neurons running up your back, and that's your spinal cord, right? And spinal cord's so important because we just talked about those peripheral nerves, right? So peripheral nerves bring in stuff from the inside also. And so if you are burned or whatever, that if you burn your hand on a pot, say you're making rice at home, you burned your hand, and so the neurons are basically alerted, and that will go all the way up your arm, goes to your spinal cord, and then up to your brain. So it's really important that that spinal cord be protected. Okay, so we look at the longest bone in the body. Longest bone is the femur, which is another word for the thigh bone, and it's also one of the thickest bones. And the fact that it's one of the thickest bones means that it is really, really hard to break. But people do. People playing hockey have broken it. I've heard of people breaking it in car accidents, really bad falls. So they're really strong, but there's a lot of pressure to break one of those. That's the longest bone in the body. The smallest bone in the body is the stapes, which is actually a bone in your it's actually a bone in your ear. It's the smallest bone in your body. And so what are bones made up of? Well, first of all, remember bones are living tissue, okay? They're made of mostly calcium and phosphorus, and they have different layers. Remember, the different layers are different tissues, so the bone is actually considered an organ. And interestingly enough, there's part of your bone that actually it's called spongy bone, and it looks like it has little holes in it, right? And that's not that there's anything wrong with it, but the structure of your bones make them lightweight and very, very strong. Okay. And that's where we're going to stop for here. Again, when I'm done with this, I'm going to post it right up here underneath the skeletal system. So if you need to go back and look at it, you can certainly do that. Thank you, everyone.